The Kepler station floated in the void between stars, a massive wheel of metal and glass that housed over 50,000 beings from 12 different species. Dr. Sarah Chen pushed her daughter's hover stroller through the crowded central plaza, weaving between towering Vrathari merchants and their crystalline wares, past the scuttling Zephyrian traders with their 6 legs clicking against the deck plating. 3-year-old Emma sat up in her stroller, eyes wide with wonder at the alien sights around her. Her small hands reached toward everything: the glowing fruit from Kepler 7, the singing crystals that the Melodian vendors used to attract customers, the holographic fish that swam through the air above the Aquarian Embassy's booth. "Mama, what's that?" Emma pointed at a group of tall, blue-skinned Azurians discussing trade routes in their musical language. "Those are our friends from the Azura system, sweetheart," Sarah replied, slowing the stroller. "They help us grow food in space." The Azurians noticed Emma's attention and waved their 4-fingered hands. One of them whistled a greeting melody and Emma giggled, trying to whistle back. The aliens looked surprised and pleased by the toddler's attempt at communication. This was daily life on Kepler Station, humanity's first major diplomatic outpost in the Galactic Cooperative. 3 years ago, humans had finally been accepted as the 13th member species, after decades of proving they weren't the violent barbarians that first contact reports had suggested. The process had been long and careful, with extensive psychological evaluations and cultural exchanges. Sarah worked as a xenobiologist in the station's research division, studying the fascinating ways different species had evolved across the galaxy. Her husband Mark served as a communications officer, helping to translate between species when the universal translators couldn't handle cultural nuances. They had decided to raise Emma here, believing that growing up among different alien species would give her a unique perspective on the universe. The other species found human children fascinating. Unlike their own offspring, who were either born with adult-level intelligence or spent years in protective shells, human children seemed to learn through play and exploration. The concept of childhood wonder was uniquely human, and it drew curious stares wherever Emma went. "Dr. Chen," called a familiar voice. Sarah turned to see Dr. Vorthak, a Krathari scientist whose insect-like features were partially hidden behind a breathing apparatus that helped him process the station's oxygen-rich atmosphere. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of friendly greeting among his people. "Hello, Vorthak," Sarah said, stopping the stroller. "How are the cultural integration studies going?" "Most fascinating," Vorthak replied, his translator rendering his clicks and chittering into accented English. "Your species continues to surprise us. Today we observed a human maintenance worker singing while repairing a ventilation unit. When asked why, he said it made the work more enjoyable. Such behavior is unprecedented." Emma had turned around in her stroller to look at Dr. Vorthak. She wasn't afraid of his appearance like many adults were. Instead, she reached out toward his antennae, which twitched with curiosity. "Pretty," Emma declared, making grabbing motions at the iridescent antennae. Vorthak's mandibles clicked in what Sarah recognized as amusement. "Your offspring finds beauty in the functional," he observed. "How very human." As they continued through the plaza, Sarah noticed they were approaching the newer section of the station, where the latest addition to the Galactic Cooperative had set up their embassy. The simians had only joined the cooperative 6 months ago, and they were still adapting to life among other species. The simians were remarkable in that they were the species most physically similar to humans that had yet been discovered. They had evolved on a world called Arborea, where massive tree cities stretched between the forest canopies. While they looked remarkably like Earth's great apes, particularly orangutans, they possessed advanced intelligence and had developed biotechnology that worked in harmony with their forest environment. "Mama, look," Emma pointed ahead with excitement. There, sitting alone on a bench outside the simian embassy, was what appeared to be a large orangutan. Its reddish-brown fur gleamed under the station's artificial lighting, and its long arms hung down as it sat hunched forward, looking dejected. This was Keeper Bramble, one of the simian diplomats who had been struggling to adapt to life among so many different species. Unlike humans, who seemed to thrive on diversity and new experiences, most simians found the constant presence of alien species overwhelming. They were used to the peaceful quiet of their forest homes, where communication was gentle and non-threatening. The bustling, noisy environment of Kepler Station had proven difficult for many of them. Bramble had been particularly affected. As a keeper of ancient songs, he was responsible for maintaining the oral histories of his people through complex musical narratives. But the constant noise and unfamiliar sounds of the station had disrupted his ability to hear the subtle harmonies that guided his work. He had been spending more and more time sitting alone, unable to fulfill his duties. Sarah had heard about Bramble's struggles from her colleagues in the diplomatic corps. Several attempts had been made to help him adjust, including soundproofed quarters and meditation chambers, but nothing seemed to work. The Simian delegation was considering sending him home, which would be seen as a failure of the integration process. Emma was squirming in her stroller now, trying to get closer to Bramble. "Mama monkey!" "Shh, Emma, that's not polite," Sarah whispered, but she was curious about her daughter's reaction. Emma had always been drawn to animals, but this was different. There was an intensity in her gaze that Sarah had never seen before. Bramble looked up at the sound of Emma's voice. His large, intelligent eyes met the toddler's, and for a moment something passed between them. It was subtle, like the shimmer of heat rising from warm pavement, barely visible but definitely there. Emma reached out both of her small hands toward Bramble, fingers opening and closing in the universal gesture of a child wanting to be picked up. But there was something else in her expression, a focus and determination that seemed far beyond her 3 years. Bramble tilted his head, studying the small human with growing curiosity. His depression seemed to lift slightly as he watched Emma's earnest attempts to communicate with him across the plaza. Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the air around them had become charged with some kind of energy. Other passers-by seemed to notice it too, slowing their steps and turning to look at the unlikely pair staring at each other across the space. Something extraordinary was about to happen, though none of them could have predicted what would come next. Emma began making soft cooing sounds, the kind she usually reserved for the family cat back on Earth during their visits to Sarah's parents. But these weren't random baby noises. They had a rhythm to them, a gentle melodic quality that seemed to pulse in harmony with the station's life support systems. Bramble's ears perked up. His depression, which had weighed on him like a heavy blanket for weeks, began to lift as he listened to the strange music coming from the tiny human. The sounds weren't words in any language he knew, but somehow they felt familiar, like echoes of the forest songs from his homeworld. Sarah noticed the change immediately. "Emma, what are you doing, sweetie?" But Emma wasn't listening to her mother. Her entire attention was focused on Bramble. She had stopped squirming in her stroller and was sitting perfectly still, her small hands moving in graceful patterns that seemed to accompany her vocalizations. Other beings in the plaza began to stop and stare. The Vrithari, whose race communicated primarily through crystalline resonance, found their gem-like skin beginning to shimmer in response to Emma's sounds. The Melodians, masters of harmonic communication, fell silent as they tried to understand the patterns in the child's voice. Dr. Vorthak approached Sarah with evident concern. "Dr. Chen, is your offspring experiencing some form of distress? These vocalizations are unlike anything in our xenological databases." "I don't know," Sarah admitted, watching her daughter with growing amazement. "She's never done anything like this before." Bramble rose slowly from his bench. At his full height, he was an imposing figure, nearly 7 feet tall with arms that could span 12 feet when extended. But his movement was gentle, almost reverent as he took a step toward Emma. The toddler's cooing grew stronger, more complex. What had started as simple sounds was becoming something else entirely, a language of pure emotion and intent that transcended the need for words. Emma was somehow speaking directly to Bramble's soul, and he was beginning to respond. Bramble opened his mouth and released a low, harmonious note that seemed to vibrate through the station's hull. It was the first sound he had made in weeks beyond the basic necessities of communication. The note was filled with the sadness of his isolation, the longing for his forest home, and the fear that he would never find his place among the stars. Emma's response was immediate. Her cooing shifted, becoming warmer, more welcoming. It was as if she was offering comfort to a friend who was hurting. The musical conversation between them began to attract more attention as other species gathered around the plaza, drawn by something they couldn't name but felt compelled to witness. Ambassador Nexus, The chief Azurian diplomat hurried over to Sarah's side. Her blue skin was flushed with excitement, and her forearms gestured rapidly as she spoke. Dr. Chen, what is happening here? Our empathic sensors are detecting unprecedented harmonic resonance between your offspring and the simian diplomat. I honestly don't know, Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder and concern. Emma has always been sensitive to emotions, but this is something entirely different. Bramble took another step closer, and Emma reached out both arms toward him. The space between them seemed to shimmer with an almost visible energy that made the air taste of growing things and distant rainfall. Several of the more psychically sensitive species in the crowd began to murmur in their own languages, trying to describe what they were experiencing. The simian diplomat's eyes were wide with recognition. In his own language, he spoke rapidly to his assistant, a younger simian named Swift Branch who had been watching from the embassy entrance. What is he saying? Sarah asked. Swift Branch approached carefully, his translator working to convert his words. Keeper Bramble says the small human is singing the forest song. But that is impossible. The forest song is sacred to our people. It cannot be learned by outsiders. It must be felt in the heart since birth. Emma was becoming more animated now, bouncing slightly in her stroller as her musical communication with Bramble grew stronger. The sound wasn't just coming from her voice anymore. It seemed to emanate from her entire being, creating subtle vibrations that other species could feel through their various sensory organs. A crowd was gathering now, representatives from all 12 other species forming a rough circle around the extraordinary scene. The quantum phase beings materialized partially into this dimension just to observe. The normally solitary void walkers emerged from their dimensional pockets to witness what was happening. Dr. Yilan Presk, the station's chief xenopsychologist, pushed through the crowd with her scanning equipment. I need everyone to step back. I'm reading energy signatures I've never seen before, but nobody moved. They were all transfixed by the sight of a 3-year-old human child and an adult simian diplomat engaged in what could only be described as a conversation of the soul. Bramble knelt down in front of Emma's stroller, bringing his large form closer to her level. His massive hands, capable of crushing metal, reached out with infinite gentleness. Emma immediately placed her tiny hands in his palms, and the moment they touched, everything changed. The harmonic resonance that had been building between them suddenly exploded outward in a wave of pure emotional connection. Every being in the plaza felt it, not as sound, but as a direct experience of what it meant to be lonely, to be different, to be far from home, and then to find understanding and acceptance. The Krathari, whose species had evolved without the concept of physical comfort, suddenly understood what it meant to be hugged. The Voidwalkers, who existed in isolated dimensional spaces, felt the warmth of community for the first time. The crystalline Vrathari experienced something their silicon-based minds had never processed, the simple joy of being accepted exactly as they were. Emma giggled, a sound of pure delight that somehow contained within it the essence of every positive emotion she had ever felt. Bramble's response was a deep rumbling sound that spoke of ancient forests and the wisdom of generations, but also of hope and new beginnings. Dr. Presk's instruments were going wild. The energy readings are off the charts. This isn't telepathy or any known form of psychic communication. It's something else entirely. What do you mean? Sarah asked, never taking her eyes off her daughter. I mean, Dr. Presk said, her voice filled with awe. Your daughter seems to be generating some kind of universal empathic field. She's not just communicating with Bramble. She's creating a connection that every species here can understand and participate in. Swift Branch was translating rapidly as Bramble spoke. He says the child carries the song of all things. In our oldest legends, it was said that someday a being would come who could sing the harmony that connects all living things. But we thought it was just a myth. Emma was still holding Bramble's hands, and the energy field around them was stabilizing into something that felt almost safe. The various species in the crowd were beginning to look at each other differently, seeing past their surface differences to something deeper and more fundamental. For the first time since arriving at Kepler Station, Bramble looked truly happy. The burden of isolation that had weighed on him was lifting, replaced by a sense of connection that was somehow pure and uncomplicated. Like the trust of a child, Emma looked up at her mother and pointed at Bramble. Friend, she said clearly, using one of her favorite words. Then she turned back to Bramble and continued her wordless song. weaving patterns of sound and emotion that seemed to heal something broken in the heart of everyone who heard them. The implications of what was happening were staggering, but for now, all that mattered was a toddler and an orangutan-like alien who had found something beautiful in each other, and in doing so had shown everyone watching that connection was possible across any divide. The emergency research team arrived within minutes, called by Dr. Presk's urgent communications. But as they approached with their scanning equipment and data collection devices, something unexpected happened. Emma looked up at them and made a soft shushing sound, the kind a parent might make to calm a crying baby. The instruments immediately powered down. "What's happening to our equipment?" demanded Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's chief science officer, frantically checking his scanner. "The child appears to be generating some kind of interference field," Dr. Presk explained, though her voice carried uncertainty. "But it's not electromagnetic or any energy signature we understand." Emma had turned her attention back to Bramble, who was now sitting cross-legged on the plaza floor to be closer to her eye level. Their wordless conversation continued, but it had evolved into something even more remarkable. The energy field around them wasn't just emotional anymore. It was beginning to carry information. Ambassador Cathera of the Telepathic Communion approached Sarah cautiously. Her species was naturally psychic, communicating through direct mind-to-mind contact. But what she was experiencing now was unlike anything in their extensive psychic knowledge. "Dr. Chen," Cathera said, her mental voice carrying overtones of wonder, "your daughter is not using telepathy as we understand it. She is creating something new. The child is somehow making the barrier between minds permeable." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. "It means," Cathera replied, "that she is allowing beings to share experiences directly without losing their individual identity. Watch." Cathera gestured toward the crowd that had gathered. The various species weren't just watching Emma and Bramble anymore. They were beginning to interact with each other in ways that had never been seen before. A Krathari merchant was gently touching a Melodian trader's sound-producing organs, not with the cautious curiosity of scientific study, but with the understanding of someone who could somehow feel what it was like to communicate through pure music. The Melodian was responding by creating harmonies that the Krathari's analytical mind could process as mathematical beauty. Two Azurian diplomats were sharing water with a void walker who had fully materialized into this dimension, something their species never did in the presence of others. The void walker was experiencing the sensation of taste for the first time, and the Azurians were somehow sharing the experience of existing between dimensions. "This is unprecedented," whispered Dr. Thane Cotel, a researcher from the Galactic Cooperation's Xenological Institute. "Your daughter is facilitating not just communication, but genuine understanding between species that should have no common ground." Emma seemed completely unaware of the scientific attention she was attracting. Her focus remained entirely on Bramble, and their connection was deepening with each passing moment. The simian diplomat's expression had transformed from the dejected loneliness of earlier to something approaching joy. Bramble began to hum, a deep resonant sound that carried undertones of wind through leaves and the ancient rhythms of his forest world. Emma responded by clapping her hands in a pattern that matched his melody, creating a percussion that enhanced the music without overwhelming it. "He's sharing the song of deep roots," Swift Branch translated, his voice filled with awe. "That is one of our most sacred harmonies. It tells the story of how all living things are connected through the soil and air they share. No outsider has ever been able to understand it, let alone participate in it." But Emma wasn't just understanding the song, she was adding to it. Her clapping pattern began to incorporate rhythms that spoke of other worlds, of metal corridors and artificial air, of the loneliness of space and the courage it took to reach across the void between stars, to touch another being's soul. Dr. Vorthak approached with his specialized sensory equipment, the only instruments that still seemed to function near Emma. "Fascinating," he chittered. "The child is not generating interference, she is creating harmony. Our devices cannot function because they are designed to analyze and categorize, but what she creates cannot be dissected, only experienced." Sarah was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the implications of what was happening. "Is she safe? Is this hurting her somehow?" Dr. Presk had managed to get some readings from a distance. "Her vital signs are actually better than normal. Heart rate steady, brain activity showing patterns I've never seen. Not chaotic, but incredibly complex. It's as if her mind is processing information in ways that shouldn't be possible for a 3-year-old. Not processing, Cathara corrected gently. Translating. Your daughter is somehow serving as a living universal translator, but not for words, for the fundamental experience of being alive. The crowd was growing larger as word spread throughout the station. Beings who had never shown interest in interspecies interaction were drawn to the plaza by something they couldn't name, but felt compelled to witness. The usually reserved quantum phase beings were materializing in increasing numbers. Even the mysterious deep dwellers who normally remained in the station's lower levels began to emerge. Commander Sarah Martinez, the station's military liaison, arrived with the security team, but she quickly ordered them to stand down when she saw what was happening. There was no threat here, quite the opposite. For the first time since the station's founding, representatives of all 13 species were gathering in the same space without tension or misunderstanding. Emma suddenly looked up from her interaction with Bramble and gazed around at the assembled crowd. Her face lit up with delight, as if she had just noticed that she was surrounded by friends. She waved at the various aliens with the unself-conscious enthusiasm that only small children possessed. "Hi," she called out using one of her first words. The simple greeting somehow carried with it an invitation, a welcome that transcended language and culture. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every species present responded in their own way. The Melodians burst into harmonious song. The Crathari's skin began to glow with pleasant colors. The Azurians created small water sculptures in the air, and the Void Walkers flickered through several dimensions in what could only be described as a dance of joy. Bramble stood up and, with great ceremony, lifted Emma from her stroller. Sarah started forward in alarm, but something in the simian's gentle expression stopped her. This wasn't abduction. It was an honor. Holding Emma carefully against his chest, Bramble began to sing. It was the song of new beginnings, one of the most important melodies in simian culture, usually reserved for the birth of a new keeper or the founding of a new tree city. But he was singing it for Emma, and somehow everyone present understood its significance. Emma giggled and patted Bramble's face with her tiny hands, completely comfortable in his arms. She began to hum along with his song, adding her own melody that spoke of curiosity and wonder, of the joy of discovery, and the fearless love that children have for all living things. Dr. Cotel was furiously taking notes on one of the few devices that was still functioning at the edge of the field. "This changes everything we know about consciousness and communication. If humans can do this, if this child represents some new evolution in human psychic development, the implications for interstellar cooperation are staggering." But even as the scientists tried to analyze what was happening, everyone present understood that they were witnessing something that couldn't be reduced to data and theories. They were seeing the birth of something new, not just a form of communication, but a new way of existing together in the vast, lonely universe. Emma looked out at the crowd from Bramble's arms and smiled the radiant smile that only children can produce. Completely unaware that she was changing the course of galactic history, all she knew was that she had made a friend, and that making friends was one of the best things in the universe. News of the extraordinary events in Central Plaza spread throughout Kepler Station with unprecedented speed. Within hours, emergency sessions were being called in the Galactic Cooperative Council chambers, and priority communications were being sent to the homeworlds of all 13 member species. Admiral Chen Zhao, Sarah's father-in-law, and one of humanity's highest-ranking representatives in the cooperative, arrived on the next transport from Earth. He found his daughter-in-law in the station's medical bay, where Emma was undergoing every non-invasive scan the combined medical knowledge of 13 species could provide. "How is she?" Admiral Chen asked, watching through the observation window as Emma played with holographic toys while completely unaware of the sensors studying her. "Physically, she's perfect," Dr. Presk reported, "but the readings we're getting don't match anything in our databases. Her brain is showing neural activity patterns that shouldn't exist in a human child. It's as if she's processing information on multiple levels simultaneously. And the effect on the other species? That's where things get really interesting," Dr. Cotel interjected, looking up from his research station. "We've discovered that Emma's ability isn't random. She seems to instinctively understand the exact emotional and psychological needs of every being she encounters, and she provides exactly what they need to connect with others. Through the window, they could see Bramble sitting next to Emma's examination bed. The simian diplomat had refused to leave her side, claiming that she was still teaching him the song of understanding that his people had lost generations ago. Medical scans showed that his stress levels had dropped to normal for the first time since arriving at the station. "There's more," Commander Martinez added, entering the observation room with a serious expression. "We've had reports from all over the station. Wherever Emma's influence has reached, we're seeing unprecedented cooperation between species. The Cretharian-Melodian trade dispute that's been going on for months, they solved it in 20 minutes of actual communication. The territorial conflict between the Voidwalkers and the quantum phase beings, they're now discussing shared dimensional space." Admiral Chen frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Martinez replied, "that your granddaughter might have accidentally solved the Galactic Cooperative's biggest problem. Communication breakdowns between species have been responsible for every major conflict in the past century. If Emma can teach other beings to truly understand each other, the implications hung in the air like a charged particle ready to explode." In the medical bay, Emma had noticed the adults watching her and waved cheerfully. The simple gesture somehow conveyed such warmth and acceptance that several of the hardened military officers found themselves smiling despite the gravity of the situation. Dr. Cathara materialized beside them, her psychic presence carrying urgent information. "Admiral Chen, we have a situation developing. Word of what happened here has reached the hegemony." The hegemony was a loose alliance of warrior species that had refused to join the Galactic Cooperative, viewing it as weakness and inefficiency. They had been testing the cooperative's borders for months, probing for any sign of division or internal conflict they could exploit. "What's their response?" Admiral Chen asked. "Fleet movements on the border," Cathara replied. "They're demanding to know what new weapon the humans have developed. They don't understand that this isn't military technology." "Because they can't comprehend it," Dr. Kotel added. "The hegemony species are built around concepts of dominance and hierarchy. The idea of true equality and understanding between different species is literally outside their mental framework." Through the medical bay window, they watched as Emma finished her examination and was reunited with her mother. The moment Sarah picked up her daughter, the ambient tension in the entire medical facility seemed to decrease. Even the normally anxious Zephyrian nurses appeared more relaxed. "We need to understand how this works," Admiral Chen said. "Can it be taught? Can it be replicated?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Dr. Presk replied. "But every test we run suggests that what Emma does isn't learned behavior. It's something fundamental about how her mind processes empathy and connection." As if summoned by their conversation, Ambassador Nexus arrived with representatives from several other species. The normally diplomatic Azurian appeared unusually agitated. "Admiral Chen," she said, her forearms gesturing rapidly, "we need to discuss security protocols. If the hegemony believes we've developed some form of psychic weapon, they may launch a preemptive strike. More importantly," added Delegate Vexani of the Crystalline Collective, "the other cooperative worlds are demanding answers. Some are calling for Emma to be studied on their home planets. Others want her abilities to be shared immediately with their species." "She's a 3-year-old child," Sarah said firmly, emerging from the medical bay with Emma in her arms. "Not some experimental tool to be passed around the galaxy." Emma looked around at all the concerned adult faces and did what toddlers do best. She offered comfort. She reached out toward Ambassador Nexus and made a soft cooing sound, the same type of vocalization that had first connected her with Bramble. The effect was immediate. Nexus's agitation calmed, and her skin shifted to the soft blue color that Azurians displayed when feeling peaceful. I apologize, Dr. Chen. You're absolutely right. The child's welfare must come first." "But we can't ignore the implications," Admiral Chen said gently. "Emma, if what we've observed is accurate, she might be humanity's greatest contribution to galactic peace. But she might also be our greatest vulnerability." Dr. Vorthak scuttled into the room, his equipment clicking against the floor. "I have been analyzing the data from the Plaza incident. The energy field the child generates appears to be quantum entangled with the consciousness of every being it touches. The effect is not temporary. The connections she creates appear to be permanent." "What does that mean exactly?" Sarah asked. It means, Cathara replied, her mental voice filled with wonder, that everyone who has experienced Emma's gift is now permanently more capable of understanding and connecting with other species. She hasn't just facilitated communication, she's evolved the consciousness of everyone she's touched. The room fell silent as the magnitude of this revelation sank in. Emma had somehow permanently upgraded the ability of dozens of beings to empathize and connect across species lines. The hegemony will never accept this, Admiral Chen said quietly. To them, it will seem like a form of mental manipulation or consciousness control. But it's not control, Bramble said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Swift Branch translated his words. He says Emma doesn't change who you are. She helps you become more yourself. She shows you connections that were always there but that you couldn't see before. Emma squirmed in her mother's arms and reached toward Bramble. When he offered his large hand, she placed her tiny palm against it, and the harmony between them resumed, filling the room with a sense of peace and possibility. Whatever happens next, Sarah said, looking around at the assembled representatives of multiple species, we handle it together. Emma has shown us that's possible. The question is whether we're brave enough to follow her example. Outside the medical bay windows, Kepler Station continued its rotation between the stars, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time in galactic history, beings from different worlds were beginning to truly understand each other, and at the center of it all was a human toddler who thought she had simply made a friend. The crisis came 3 days later, announced by the shrill warning klaxons that echoed through every corridor of Kepler Station. Admiral Chen rushed to the command center where Commander Martinez was coordinating with the station's defense systems. Report, he ordered. Hegemony battle fleet dropping out of hyperspace. Martinez replied, her face grim. 12 heavy cruisers and a dreadnought. They're demanding immediate surrender of what they're calling our consciousness manipulation weapon. On the main view screen, the Hegemony fleet formed an intimidating battle formation, their dark ships bristling with weapons that could reduce Kepler Station to debris in minutes. The lead vessel, a massive dreadnought called the Iron Dominion, was transmitting on all frequencies. This is War Commander Brutus Rex of the Hegemony. The translation system rendered his harsh vocalizations. We know you have developed a psychic weapon capable of altering the minds of other species. Surrender the weapon and its creators immediately, or we will consider this an act of war against all free-thinking beings. In the residential section, Sarah held Emma close as the emergency lights flashed. The toddler seemed confused by all the commotion but not frightened. Instead, she kept looking toward the walls of the station as if she could sense something beyond them. Mama, why are the pretty lights angry? Emma asked, pointing toward the pulsing emergency illumination. They're not angry, sweetheart, Sarah said, though her voice betrayed her fear. They're just confused. Bramble had remained close to their family quarters since the plaza incident, serving as an unofficial guardian. Now he approached with Swift Branch close behind. The child is agitated by the discord, Swift Branch translated. Keeper Bramble says she can feel the hostility from the approaching ships and it's causing her distress. That distress was becoming apparent throughout the station. In areas where Emma's influence had been strongest, beings who had experienced her gift of connection were now experiencing something like withdrawal. The Melodians had stopped singing. The normally cheerful Azurians were displaying stress colors. Even the resilient Krathari were showing signs of anxiety. It's like she created a network, Dr. Presk explained to Admiral Chen over the communication system. Everyone she touched is now psychically linked at some level. When she's distressed, they feel it too. Can we use this? Admiral Chen asked. If the Hegemony boards the station, will they be affected by her abilities? We don't know, Dr. Kotel replied. The Hegemony species are fundamentally different. Their entire social structure is based on dominance and aggression. They might be immune to her influence or what? Or the experience might be traumatic for them. Imagine beings whose entire identity is built on superiority and control suddenly experiencing true empathy and equality. It could be psychologically devastating. In the command center, the Hegemony fleet was powering weapons. War Commander Brutus Rex was demanding a response to his ultimatum. Admiral Chen found himself facing an impossible choice. Surrender Emma to beings who would likely study her like a laboratory specimen, or risk a battle that Kepler Station couldn't win. Then Emma's voice came over the communication system. She had somehow accessed the station's internal communications array from her quarters. Though no one understood how a 3-year-old could manipulate such complex technology, her childish voice, speaking in simple words, was broadcasting throughout the station. "Hello," she said, using the same cheerful greeting she had given to Bramble. "Are you sad? Do you want to be friends?" The effect was immediate and startling. Every being on Kepler Station who had been touched by Emma's gift suddenly felt a surge of her innocent compassion and unconditional acceptance. The Melodians burst into spontaneous harmony. The Azurians began creating welcoming water sculptures. Even the normally reserved quantum phase beings manifested more fully than they ever had before. But more importantly, her voice was being transmitted to the hegemony fleet. On the bridge of the Iron Dominion, War Commander Brutus Rex paused in his preparations for battle. The alien child's voice carried something he had never experienced before, an offer of friendship without conditions, acceptance without judgment, love without fear. For a moment, just a moment, the massive warrior felt something crack in the armor around his heart. "Sir?" his weapons officer asked, confused by the sudden halt in their attack preparation. Brutus Rex shook his massive head, trying to clear it of the strange sensations the child's voice had triggered. "Proceed with the assault," he growled, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Emma's broadcast continued, no longer just words but the same wordless song she had shared with Bramble. But now it was amplified by every being on Kepler Station who had been touched by her gift. Hundreds of voices from a dozen species joined her melody, creating a harmony that reached across space to touch the hearts of the hegemony warriors. "What is this?" demanded Captain Seaver Claw, commander of one of the heavy cruisers. "My crew is acting strangely. They're laying down their weapons," it was true. Throughout the hegemony fleet, warriors who had never known anything but aggression and dominance were experiencing emotions they had no names for. The song Emma and her friends were singing wasn't just heard, it was felt, directly and powerfully, bypassing all their psychological defenses. War Commander Brutus Rex found himself thinking of his offspring, still young on the hegemony homeworld, being trained to fight and conquer. For the first time he wondered what it would be like if they grew up in a universe where making friends was more important than making war. "Commander," his tactical officer reported in alarm, "the crew is refusing to charge weapons. They say they don't want to hurt the singing child." This was unprecedented in hegemony history. Their species had been bred for warfare, their entire culture built around conquest and domination. The idea of refusing a direct order to attack was not just unthinkable, it should have been psychologically impossible. But Emma's song was showing them a different way to exist. Not weaker, not submissive, but simply different. A way of being strong that didn't require others to be weak. A way of being proud that didn't require others to be ashamed. On Kepler Station, Sarah watched her daughter with growing amazement and concern. Emma was sitting in the middle of her play area, surrounded by representatives from every species on the station, all of them adding their voices to her song. The energy field around her was stronger than it had ever been, reaching out across space itself to touch minds that had never known peace. She's trying to help them, Sarah realized. She can sense that they're in pain and she's trying to heal them. But can she? Admiral Chen asked over the communication system. Can anyone be healed from centuries of conditioning toward violence? The answer came from an unexpected source. War Commander Brutus Rex himself, his massive form appearing on the main view screen as he opened a direct communication channel. Kepler Station, he said, his voice much quieter than before. We request permission to approach under peaceful terms. My crew wishes to meet the singing child. For a moment, no one on either side knew what to say. A hegemony battle fleet requesting peaceful contact was like asking gravity to flow upward. Admiral Chen looked around at his advisors, then at the image of his granddaughter on the internal monitors, still singing her song of friendship and connection. Permission granted, War Commander, he said, but you come aboard unarmed and you come with open hearts. Yes, Brutus Rex replied, his voice carrying a wonder that no one had ever heard from a hegemony warrior. We will come with open hearts. As the first hegemony shuttle approached Kepler Station's docking bay, Emma finished her song and looked up at her mother with the satisfied expression of a child who had completed an important task. All done, Mama, she said happily. Everyone's friends now. The main docking bay of Kepler Station had been hastily converted into a meeting space unlike any in galactic history. Representatives from all 13 cooperative species stood alongside Kepler Station's security forces, while medical teams waited nearby with equipment designed to handle beings whose physiology was built for warfare. War Commander Brutus Rex was the first to emerge from the Hegemony shuttle, and his appearance caused several species to step back involuntarily. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, his reptilian hide was scarred from countless battles, and his massive clawed hands had never known any purpose but destruction. Behind him came his senior officers, each one a perfect example of their species' warrior breeding. But something was different about them. The typical aggressive posture of Hegemony warriors was absent. Instead, they moved with an uncertainty that was completely alien to their nature, as if they were walking in a world whose rules they no longer understood. "Where is the singing child?" War Commander Brutus Rex asked, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding tone. "My crew. They cannot stop thinking about her song. They say it has shown them things they never knew existed." Admiral Chen stepped forward, flanked by diplomatic representatives. "She's on her way, War Commander. But I need your word that you mean no harm to her or anyone on this station." "Harm?" Brutus Rex looked genuinely confused by the concept. How could anyone wish harm to something so... He struggled for words in a language that had no terms for the emotions Emma had awakened in him. "So bright?" The massive warrior's confusion was echoed by his crew. Captain Seaverclaw was staring at a Melodian trader with an expression of wonder, as if seeing color for the first time. Lieutenant Razor Point was examining his own clawed hands with what could only be described as dismay, as if he couldn't understand why they had been designed for violence. "Commander Rex," Dr. Kithara said, approaching carefully, "your crew is experiencing what we call empathic awakening. The child's gift has activated emotional centers in your minds that may have been dormant for generations. Is that what this is?" Brutus Rex touched his chest, where his species' equivalent of a heart was beating in an unfamiliar rhythm. This sensation of connection to other beings. This desire to protect rather than conquer. Before anyone could answer, the bay doors opened and Sarah entered with Emma in her stroller, accompanied by Bramble and several other beings who had formed something like an honor guard around the child. The moment Emma appeared, the emotional atmosphere in the bay shifted dramatically. The Hegemony warriors, beings bred for aggression and dominance, found themselves dropping to one knee as if in the presence of something sacred. It wasn't submission, their genetic programming wouldn't allow that, but rather a recognition of something pure and valuable that needed to be protected. Emma looked around at all the new faces with delight. "More friends," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. The sound somehow contained all the joy and acceptance that the universe could hold. War Commander Brutus Rex found himself moving forward, without conscious thought, drawn by something deeper than instinct. When he reached Emma's stroller, he knelt down to bring his massive form closer to her level, just as Bramble had done days ago. "Hello, little songmaker," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in decades. I was a warrior, but I do not know what I am now." Emma studied his scarred face with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Then she reached out with one tiny hand and touched the largest scar across his snout, a mark from a battle he had fought years ago and worn as a badge of honor. The moment her fingers made contact, Brutus Rex gasped. For the first time in his life, he felt the pain that his violence had caused others. Not just physical pain, but the emotional devastation of loss, the grief of families broken by war, the fear of children who had never known safety. But along with that pain came something else: forgiveness. Emma wasn't judging him for what he had been. She was simply offering him the possibility of becoming something different. Tears, an emotional response that Hegemony warriors didn't even possess the biological capability for, began to form in Brutus Rex's eyes. His crew watched in amazement as their commander, the most feared warrior in the fleet, wept for the first time in his life. "I see them," he whispered, "all the beings I have hurt, all the worlds I have conquered. How do you carry such pain, little one? How do you offer friendship to someone like me?" Emma smiled and patted his scarred snout gently. "Hurts go away when you make friends," she said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "Everyone's nice inside." Everyone's nice inside, Brutus Rex repeated as if testing the words. Even warriors? Even monsters like us? No monsters, Emma said firmly. Just friends who forgot how to be friends. The other hegemony warriors were experiencing their own transformations. Captain Severclaw was attempting to communicate with a Melodian using gentle tones instead of harsh commands. Lieutenant Razor Point was carefully examining a Zephyrian's delicate wing structure, with scientific curiosity rather than tactical assessment, but the changes weren't without their challenges. Several of the warriors were experiencing what Dr. Presk identified as identity crisis syndrome. Their entire sense of self was built around being superior through violence, and Emma's gift was showing them that true strength came from connection and compassion. Commander, one of his officers approached nervously. The crew is confused. We came here to capture a weapon, but instead we found this. How do we report this to the Hegemony High Command? It was a crucial question. The Hegemony's entire civilization was built on the principle that strength came through domination. The idea that their warriors could be infected with empathy and compassion would be seen as the ultimate threat to their way of life. Brutus Rex looked down at Emma, who was now humming softly while playing with a holographic toy that Bramble had given her. The melody was the same one she had shared across space, the song that had reached into his heart and shown him a different way to exist. We tell them the truth, he said finally. We tell them that we found something more powerful than any weapon. We found hope. Sir? His officer looked confused. Look around, Lieutenant. Brutus Rex gestured to his crew, who were now interacting peacefully with species they had been taught to view as enemies. When was the last time you saw our people happy? Really happy, not just victorious? It was true. The hegemony warriors, for all their strength and military success, had never known peace. Their entire existence had been one of constant conflict, always needing to prove their superiority, always fearing that any sign of weakness would lead to their own destruction. But here, in the presence of a human child who asked for nothing but friendship, they were experiencing something they had never known, the simple joy of being accepted exactly as they were. Emma looked up from her toy and noticed that some of the warriors still seemed troubled. With the instinctive generosity of childhood, she began to sing again, but this time her song was different. It wasn't just about connection and friendship. It was about the courage it took to change, about the strength required to choose a different path. She's teaching them that evolution isn't weakness, Dr. Cotel observed quietly. She's showing them that choosing to grow and change is the ultimate act of courage. War Commander Brutus Rex nodded slowly, understanding flooding through him. The strongest warriors are not those who never fall, but those who choose to rise again as something better. He stood up and looked around at the assembled beings, cooperative species and hegemony warriors, all united in their fascination with a 3-year-old human who had accidentally shown them all a better way to exist. What happens now? Admiral Chen asked. Brutus Rex looked down at Emma one more time, then back at the Admiral. Now we go home and try to teach our people what this child has taught us. And we hope that there are enough of us who can hear her song to make a difference. The transformation wasn't complete. Centuries of conditioning couldn't be undone in a single meeting. But something fundamental had changed in the hearts of some of the galaxy's most feared warriors, and they would carry that change back to their people, like a seed that might someday grow into lasting peace. 6 months later, the effects of what the galactic media had dubbed the Kepler incident were still rippling across the known universe. Emma Chen had become the most famous 3-year-old in galactic history, though she remained blissfully unaware of her celebrity status, more interested in her collection of stuffed animals from dozens of different worlds. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the newly expanded Kepler station, watching as the third group of hegemony refugees this week arrived seeking what they called the peace, teaching. The transformation hadn't been easy or universal. The Hegemony High Command had initially declared the affected warriors to be mentally compromised and attempted to have them reconditioned. But something remarkable had happened. The warriors who had experienced Emma's gift couldn't be unchanged. More importantly, they didn't want to be. For the first time in their species' history, hegemony warriors were refusing orders, not out of cowardice or rebellion, but out of a newly discovered understanding that violence wasn't the only form of strength. The latest reports from the hegemony border worlds are encouraging, Admiral Chen said, joining his daughter-in-law at the observation window. 3 more systems have declared themselves neutral territories. They're saying they want to learn what Brutus Rex calls the child's way. The transformation of War Commander Brutus Rex had been perhaps the most remarkable of all. Upon returning to the hegemony capital, he had attempted to explain his experience to the High Command. When they ordered him to forget his contamination and resume his military duties, he had done something unprecedented in hegemony history. He had resigned his commission. More importantly, he hadn't resigned alone. Nearly half his fleet had followed him, creating the first hegemony defection in over 1,000 years. They had established a settlement on a neutral world, trying to build a society based on the principles a human toddler had taught them in a single afternoon. "How is Emma handling all the attention?" Admiral Chen asked. Sarah smiled, gesturing toward the station's central plaza where Emma could be seen playing with a group of children from various species. At 4 years old now, she had grown more articulate but no less remarkable. She still thinks everyone just wants to be friends. Yesterday, she asked me why the big lizard people from the news broadcast looked so sad, and whether we could invite them over for tea. The big lizard people were the hegemony high command, who had been struggling to maintain control as more and more of their warriors experienced what they called the empathy infection. Several border conflicts had simply stopped when opposing forces met and found themselves unable to fight beings they suddenly understood on a fundamental level. The Galactic Cooperative had established new protocols for what they now called empathic integration therapy. While they couldn't replicate Emma's natural gift, they had learned to help beings who had experienced it adapt to their expanded emotional range. Dr. Kethara had become the leading expert in the field, working with former warriors who were learning to channel their strength into protection rather than destruction. The most fascinating development, Dr. Kotel reported, approaching with his ever-present datapad, is that the effect seems to be spreading on its own. Beings who were touched by Emma's gift are now capable of facilitating similar connections with others, though not as powerfully. It's as if she created a network of empathy that's expanding throughout the galaxy. Indeed, reports were coming in from across known space of unprecedented cooperation between species that had never been able to communicate effectively before. The rigid hierarchies that had dominated galactic politics for millennia were beginning to soften as beings discovered that understanding didn't diminish strength, it multiplied it. Bramble had become something of an ambassador for this new way of thinking. His depression cured by Emma's friendship, he had rediscovered the ancient simian songs that spoke of universal connection. He now traveled between worlds, teaching the harmony that Emma had helped him remember. "The child approaches," Bramble announced, his translator rendering his melodic speech into words, "and she brings new friends." Emma was indeed approaching, holding hands with 2 children who had arrived on the latest refugee transport, a young hegemony warrior in training and a cooperative diplomat's daughter who had been afraid of the scary lizard people until Emma had introduced them. "Look, Mama," Emma called out excitedly. "Scar and Melody are going to teach me how to sing in colors and how to be brave like warriors. But nice warriors, not scary ones." The young hegemony child, whose name translated roughly to Honorable Scar, looked up at the assembled adults with eyes that held none of the hardened aggression that characterized his species. Instead, there was curiosity and a tentative hope. The diplomat's daughter, whose species communicated through chromatic displays, was actually glowing with soft, friendly colors as she held Emma's hand. "She's doing it again," Dr. Presk observed quietly, "creating connections between beings who should be natural enemies." It's not just connections, Sarah realized, watching her daughter interact with the other children. She's showing them how to be the best versions of themselves. The hegemony child isn't losing his warrior nature. He's learning how to be a warrior who protects instead of conquers. The diplomat's daughter isn't becoming less diplomatic. She's learning how to create understanding through genuine emotion rather than just protocol. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The main view screen activated to show a sight that would have been unimaginable just months ago. Representatives from every major political entity in the galaxy, including several hegemony commanders who had been declared traitors by their own government. "Kepler Station," the transmission began. "This is the Pan-Galactic Council. We're requesting a formal assembly to discuss what we're calling the New Galactic Accord. For the first time in recorded history, we believe it may be possible to establish lasting peace between all spacefaring species. Admiral Chen looked at his granddaughter, who was now teaching her new friends how to play a game that seemed to involve singing, color-changing, and gentle mock combat all at once. What do you think, Emma? Should we help everyone learn how to be friends? Emma looked up at him with the serious expression she wore when considering important questions. Will there be cookies at the meeting? She asked. I'm sure we can arrange that. Admiral Chen laughed. Then yes, Emma decided. Everyone likes cookies. Cookies make good meetings. As the adults began making preparations for what would become the most important diplomatic gathering in galactic history, Emma returned to her play with her new friends. She had no idea that she had fundamentally altered the course of civilization across dozens of worlds. All she knew was that she had wanted to make friends with a sad orangutan-like being, and that somehow, that simple desire had spread to become something much larger. In the months that followed, the New Galactic Accord would be signed by representatives of 17 species, including several hegemony factions. Wars that had lasted centuries would end not in conquest but in understanding. Trade routes would be established based on mutual benefit, rather than exploitation, and children from across the galaxy would grow up in a universe where meeting someone different was an opportunity for friendship rather than conflict. But perhaps the most remarkable outcome was the simplest one. On worlds throughout the galaxy, parents began telling their children a story about a little human girl who saw an orangutan and decided to make a friend. And in learning to tell that story, they learned to see the universe the way Emma saw it, full of potential friends waiting to be discovered. The magic hadn't been in any special power or alien technology. The magic had been in the fundamental human capacity for unconditional love and acceptance, expressed through the fearless heart of a child who believed that everyone, no matter how different or frightening they might seem, just wanted to be understood and accepted for who they truly were. And across the galaxy, that belief was slowly but surely becoming reality.